Welcome to Start Local, where we talk with business owners, leaders of nonprofits, and other members of our community focused on doing business in and around Chester County, Pennsylvania. Each episode will provide insight into the local business scene and tell you about opportunities to connect with and support businesses and nonprofits in your local area.
The Southern Chester County Chamber of Commerce promotes trade, commerce, industry, and sustainable economic development while supporting a diverse and growing marketplace. The Chamber is proud to partner with the Start Local podcast to raise the profile of businesses and nonprofits throughout Chester County. Learn more about the Chamber at sccc.com. That's sccc.com.
Welcome to Start Local. I'm Eric Goodmanson, and I'm recording this conversation with my co-host, Liam Dempsey. Liam, how are you doing today?
Hey, Eric, I'm doing really well. Thanks for leading the ship today. Appreciate it.
I wouldn't say I'm leading, but I'm happily on the ship, that's for sure. And today we're talking with Shawn Cephas. Shawn is the owner of Forever Changes. That's a record store in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Hello and welcome, Shawn.
Guys, how are you doing? Thanks for having me on here.
Shawn, it's a real pleasure. So glad that you could make the time to join us today.
I know I am very excited for the conversation because I am a very passionate music fan. And so I want to jump right in, but start with the basics to get all of our listeners on the same level here. Shawn, you sell records and a few CDs at a shop in Phoenixville. We'll say that again. You sell records. So give our listeners an overview of the sort of music they can find at your store, Forever Changes.
Sure thing. Generally, I'd like to say everything, but because it is a smaller store, it's not Siren, it's not some of the bigger stores on the West Coast. There isn't everything. I personally, since I am a smaller store, I allow myself to carry the genres that I'm most familiar with. And so what you won't find there are like, more current, like metal, and every subgenre under that, because there are like 30 subgenres under the title metal, hardcore, things like that. I do have like the 80s stuff, for instance, 80s punk. That was like my world in high school. So, Husker Du, Black Flag, Minor Threat, Rites of Spring, all that kind of stuff. And, hardcore from the 80s, or metal from the 80s, like Metallica, Slayer, things like that, Anthrax, and into the early 90s. I mean, Metallica kept going, but my sweet spot is like Ride the Lightning through Black Album. That's just where I land. I have probably the genre that takes the most space in my store is jazz. That is by design. I'm a huge jazz fan, and I know that not many stores in the area have a great jazz section, or that the folks who work there know enough about jazz. It's pretty well curated, and it's deep. And what helps also is two of the major jazz labels, Blue Note and OJC, Original Jazz Classics, have been doing an incredible reissue series for the past, I'd say, 4 years. I think the Blue Note reissue series has been about 10 years, but they've really ramped up with their 85th anniversary and this Tone Poet series. So there's a lot of new releases and new pressings in the jazz section, which some collectors shy away from. They'd rather have originals and things like that. But for me as a collector, I spent many years spending a lot of money trying to track down decent copies of original Blue Notes and OJCs and Riverside, things like that. And, being able to get them out for $30-$40 is, to me, a godsend. So I happily carry those. Aside from that, all the classic rock 60s and 70s. Because I am solidly Gen X, 53, the post-punk and new wave is very, very important to me. And so there actually is a bin that we have titled The Journey Forward Beginneth Here. And that is a bin that has, to me, anything you need to go forward from 1978, 79 ongoing to now. And so in there you'll find, and actually some of the artists in there are predate that, but it's all the foundational stuff. It's a bin where I'm like, hey, before you get your My Morning Jacket or your Belle and Sebastian or even your Chaperone, like you need to stop in this bin first, because this is where all the foundations for this music is. And so in there is the group Death, the original group from around 74, 75, the African American group that, in my opinion, first recorded punk rock. I know people say the blueprints are with Velvet Underground and New York Dolls and things like that, which of course, but the sound that we consider punk rock, if you look at the timeline, their lone album predates the Ramones, predates any of those groups, even Sex Pistols. So Death is in there, Big Stars in there, because, they came out in 74, but you tell me anyone of that age had ever heard that group? No. Gen X, we're the ones that co-opted them, and they belong to us. The Clash, The Jam, Smiths, R.E.M., Talking Heads, Ramones, Depeche Mode, The Cure, all this foundational stuff. Bad Brains, Husker Du. So that's in this one bin. And from there going, we go by generation. So there's the Gen X bin, which is like your mid, late 80s into early 90s, very early 90s. I think it stops around like 93, 94. And then from there, actually, it might go a little further, because from there, my wife, who's 35, she curates the what we call the Millennial LimeWire playlist, which I've been told people that age, they're like, wow, I feel way too seen in this bin. And so that's where you have like your Death Cab and Postal Service and Belle and Sebastian, Cat Power, who else would be in there?
You really do have a lot of everything.
It's pretty good. And then from there, what I call an indie bin, which is groups from like now that just are right on the precipice of making it. So Mannequin Pussy, which I hope doesn't get bleeped. Who else? Soccer Mommy, Blonde Shell, Bully. I'm trying to think of anyone else right now. I mean, there's a lot in there, but just, those acts that like, they just haven't blown up yet. And then a bin that I've kind of lovingly called Future Classics, which are groups right now that just are there. Black Pumas, was her Florence and the Machine. I think I'm missing someone. Chaperone, actually, I put in there because, she is iconic.
I agree with that decision. I support that decision.
Yeah. And then there's the pop bit, which I do love pop, but there's a little bit of gatekeepiness in there where like groups that, like, for instance, I have, what is that group? Greta Van Fleet is in the pop bin because, and honestly, I shouldn't say gatekeeping. It's more like it's about who the audience is. And I've had events for Greta Van Fleet in my store, and their audience are, young, female presenting, or just they're young. And it's a demographic that also leans into, into pop. And so they're in there. The group Camp is in there, which I'm sure someone would argue with. Yeah, so things like that. But then there's the traditional, what you consider pop, and it goes that's multi-generational. So while Dua Lipa's in there, also like Simply Red or Britney Spears, just Madonna, Duran Duran. So it's it's from right in Taylor Swift. So just anything that really falls under pop is in the pop bin, and of course the first thing, although the last thing I mentioned, but the first thing you see when you walk in the store is our soul, classic soul, neo soul, hip hop sections. And the reason it's very intentional that they are front and center, one is to pay honor to my dad's stores, but also traditionally Black music is usually relegated to like a far corner of a record store. And it's interesting because that's from my personal experience, and I felt very validated because in the Luther Vandross documentary that came out last year, one of the person they spoke to in the documentary had actually said that, just literally said the exact same thing. It was like, the reason Luther Vandross wanted to like cross over, why any black artists in the '80s wanted to cross over, is because in your typical record store, the R&B soul sections were off in a far corner of the store. And I know that, I've seen that, and that is a very common thing. So I wanted for my place to be, when you walk in the door, literally, even if you're not in the door, from the street looking into the door, the first thing you see is our soul music. So that's my store.
I like it. I want to walk with our listeners right into your store. And I'm going to walk in with them, and we see that there's a new mural on the wall.
Yeah.
And as you enter, it's on your right side, and it's a mural of an old record shop in Philadelphia. And the mural's an homage to your father's record stores. Tell us about your family's history in music and record stores.
Yeah. One of the things I tell people whenever they, ask, what made you open a record store? And I'm like, it's literally the only thing I know. So yeah, my dad was a musician in Philly, and toured a little bit, not like nationally, but he'd kind of go up the East Coast. I think going north. He never played south. But he was a musician, keyboardist, organist, electric piano, in a group that kind of bounced between R&B and jazz. It really wasn't like full-on modern jazz in the sense of like Miles or Coltrane, but more how if you saw some jazz bills, you'd see Ray Charles on there, things like that. And that was kind of my dad's idol, was Ray Charles. So he was a musician, and met my mom in, I think, 66. And she was a fan. She was going to his shows, and she, talked to this guy, and they became a thing. And a year later, in the end of year 67, he opened a record store. And the store was named after his moniker. His band was called King James Band. His name was Shawn Cephas. And so the store was King James Records. And one location that they started out with, and that is the storefront that is on the mural in my store, honoring my family's legacy in record selling. And so, yeah, the store opened in 67. And my mom loves to remind me of how hard it was starting out. They literally had just a couple boxes of records. And, back then, used, vinyl was not a thing. It was new product, 45s, long playing. And, slowly, built into the store that it became. Part of how they functioned, because my dad was still a working musician, and they had 4 kids at the time. I hadn't come along yet. Excuse me. His mom would get up, get the kids to school, come back and open the store, because my dad's schedule was playing music at night. So once he would get up, he would take over the store. She would get the kids and do that mom thing. Store would close. He'd head off to whatever gig that night, and this continued. Their first help came when my oldest brother, who would have been 19 in 1969, I believe, he became the first employee. And that was out of necessity, and also to keep him out of trouble. My brother Andre, from all accounts, was a troublemaker, but was encyclopedic with music and just had a thirst for what was new. And if you ever meet him, his excitement for anything it's infectious. And so his instructions were to sit on the stool, don't move, and sell records. And he did. And he kind of set the standard for how my dad's store sold music. And his name was Andre. And these are all stories that I've been told. I wasn't around yet, but evidently he thought it would help to sell and bring people in if they could hear the music outside. So he took a speaker and just like wired it and rigged it. And, he is a very handy guy. And so this might have been one of his first attempts at this, but just, found some way of fixing it, outside the store, and would just pump the music out to the neighborhood, and folks would come in, and basically just created this party atmosphere, and was always playing, something people hadn't heard, the newest music, and and so that kind of got things going, and from there were two other employees, I think around 1970, Jeffrey and a guy named Donnell, who became a mentor of mine, and these were young hippies in 1970, big afros, and just creating this amazing young vibe in the store. And 1971 came along, and I was born that year. And my dad was trying to still navigate being a musician, business owner, father, husband. And by September of 71, it just became too much, and he decided to stop playing music and just run the store full time. Anyway, at some point, all the kids in the family and my mom worked in the store. And my first job, probably 10 years old, maybe 11, was to, when the record labels would call, we were what's called a reporting store, which is where labels got the numbers for Billboard and Cashbox back then. And so since we were a reporting store, we had to keep track of our sales. And at a certain point in the week, these folks would call the store, and my job, evidently must have been after school, but my job was to read these numbers off of this list for these folks. And then as I got a little older, in my teens, my job was to pack the boxes and prep the invoices for returns. Back then, you could return product for credit. Now that's not a thing. But things that hadn't sold or had been sitting for a while, I had to find them on the invoice, make sure we had all the numbers there, pack them up. And what that did was, while I already had like a thirst, enjoyment for music just because of my family, that elevated the curiosity, because you're literally just, on the thing says, C. Parker, best of Roost years, and you find this album and it's like, Charlie Parker, I wonder what that is. And you couldn't stream, so a lot of times what I would do, which was not a good thing because it was costing my dad, I would just open these things and start playing them. And so it just, that was the beginning of just, me being encyclopedic. It's just like having to all I did, I was in the back room by myself and just, going through records and looking at titles and looking at artists and wonder what that sounds like. Who is this? And so, yeah. And then eventually I worked at my dad's store, like, at the counter. That was my late teens, which would have been right at the ultimate moment in hip hop, about 87, 88. Just, the story I always tell folks was when NWA Straight Outta Compton came out, because of the song After the Police on there, in Philly, like they were confiscating the cassette if anyone had it. And so we didn't have it on display. It was under the counter, and I was not allowed to handle the NWA cassettes just because you needed someone who really understood the culture. One of the other guys, young guys that worked there, was in charge of that. And so basically if someone came in and said, "Hey, do you have the NWA album?" He's like, "Nope, sorry, we don't carry it." They literally almost had to have like a code. It was like, if it was, you got that, that John with Dr. Dre, whatever. And it's like, yep, we got it. Yeah, you got that Ice Cube thing, whatever. It's there was kind of a language or a kind of code within the community of like, exactly, the deal. And
you're running a music speakeasy, it sounds like.
Pretty much, yeah. And it was actually interesting because I did see it happen where, it's like, "Hey, do you have the new Straight Outta Compton?" And, the guy's like, "Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." And so, that was a cool time to be in my late teens, senior in high school and be in that scene. And,
well, you mentioned a cassette set about that time, and your store primarily does vinyl. So I agree with you. When I was in high school, and when we were all in high school for that matter, cassettes were pretty dominant. CDs were certainly coming on the scene, but vinyl was sort of passé at that time. And vinyl has been making an amazing comeback. And as you pointed out earlier, all sorts of young new artists are releasing their music on vinyl. What do you think is driving this larger trend?
That's a great question. It's something I don't think about on a daily basis because, vinyl's been my thing forever, but because I am asked this a lot, I kind of, have enough of it in my brain to like answer a question like this. But I think in a more practical sense, I really do feel like when Taylor Swift started putting her Taylor's versions on vinyl and on social media, she was very much, showing it and talking about it. It got, a young female demographic, buying these things. And when I first opened 3.5 years ago, kids were buying, her stuff and some of the hip hop stuff and didn't have a record player. It was simple because they could listen to it anywhere, but they just had the aesthetics. But more the sort of holistic answer, I think, for a generation that, and it even stretches to millennials, they were around, that's why we call this section the LimeWire section, because it's like, they were, stealing and downloading and, there was nothing physical attached to their music. I mean, they were still the CD era, but a lot of it was burned, and, millennials into, Gen Z, into Gen Alpha, they've never had a physical relationship with their music. And like I always, tell people, if you go through your phone and start scrolling, one of the streaming apps or even your own like Apple Music, whatever, you don't get the warm fuzzies looking at titles. It doesn't even like make it appealing to want to listen to it. But I see people at my store and they start flipping and you can just hear them. It doesn't even need to be an older person. Literally someone in their 30s flipping. It's like, oh my gosh, remember that? And at this point, even in your 20s, like, it's just like, there's just an emotional connection to seeing the cover art and having this physical relationship with this music. And I think, these younger generations that never had that, it's a very new and very cool thing. And I think that's why it's continuing to grow. I think, to answer your question, like the beginning of it, I think sparked with Taylor Swift. And I really do think she almost single-handedly got people at least curious about what this, what are these big things, whatever. And, but now that, these folks do have record players now, and I mean, a lot of them are not great players, which bugs me. But, they are actually playing it. And I think what's continuing it is, when an artist has a release date and to be able to go to a physical store and pick it up and take it home. It's just, there's nothing like that versus, an album drop date and it's simply digital and you pick up your phone and you listen to the records. Like, of course that's, convenient, but there's just nothing like, going and getting this new product in your hand and being able to show people, look what I got, show your friends. So I think it's the same thing that attracted, us when we were younger. I mean, granted, there was no other option when I was younger, but like there still was, whenever I remember in 85, I think, when Prince's Around the World in a Day came out, and I brought the record to school to like show my friends, I got the new Prince record. But yeah, I think that's.
Shawn, do you know if the physical process of making the records, literally pressing the vinyl disc with the music on, has that changed since the heyday of vinyl? Or is that, I mean, obviously it's bigger and it's more and it's probably more, but like, is the process generally the same still?
Yeah, the process is the same. The technology hasn't changed. The big difference is there are so few pressing plants, which is why when folks ask me, like, what's with the prices and things like that, because they are expensive. It literally, I kind of compare it to like the craft beer type thing. It's like, in the old days, for collectors, if you look at the back of Capitol albums, like Beatles records, there's a number in the bottom right corner, and that number was the pressing plant. And I think number one. I'm embarrassed; it's not off the top of my head, but like number one was Scranton, PA. So like in Scranton, there was a pressing plant, And, so all over the country, US, they were pressing plants. And now I think there are 4 major plants in the world, like internationally. So that's not like if the 3 of us had a band and we wanted to press some albums, that's not what I mean. There's places all over the country for that. But for, a new Adele record or a Taylor Swift record, that's going to be a major plant. And I believe there's only 4. And so, obviously scarcity creates, price increase. And I'm not, some of these, I wonder, if some of these prices could, if it has to be this expensive, but, some of that is, things beyond our means and the market and, these executives who want to make a lot of money. But the one thing that has definitely changed, I do have to let people know when they're in the store, in the old days, a picture disc was not really meant for playing. They would destroy your needle and they sounded terrible because I literally think they put a film over top of the record to create, I have a Culture Club picture disc from when I was a preteen. And, but I don't know the technology for this, but picture discs now sound incredible. There's a teeny bit of surface noise. I kind of hate surface noise. So for me, it's still fine. Once the music plays, you don't hear it. But when you first drop the needle before the music starts, you do hear some surface noise. But man, whatever the technology is for making picture discs now and colored vinyl, I have seen some videos on that. But specifically picture discs, they sound really, really good. So for listeners who may be of a certain age, don't shy away from picture discs, in my opinion.
That's an interesting subtlety. Let me ask you one more audiophile subtlety type question, if I could, and that is with the production of the music that goes onto the records. Because, a big part of why a lot of people like older records is it's a completely analog experience. It was recorded in analog. You're playing it back in analog. You're not getting that conversion over to digital. Modern artists that are recording and releasing new albums on vinyl, are they also recording in analog, or are they recording in digital and then it's being laid down to that analog medium?
Things are almost exclusively digital now. This is more... This is like switching scope. This is more because my brother-in-law runs a studio and records a lot of artists, and my wife is a recording and performing musician. And so my brother-in-law, he has the band he was in. I'm not sure what the status of the band right now, but they have pressed to vinyl, and he's had to remix and remaster. And so what I do know because of him is that if an artist records something and streams it, and then they're like, hey, we want to press vinyl of this, he has to go back and remix and remaster it, which is why you will hear differences in streaming, even if you're streaming on like a very high quality, like Apple Music, and going into a nice Bluetooth, and like if your system's solid, you will still hear a sonic difference between that and vinyl, because it actually is a different mix and mastered differently. An interesting example of that, about 3 years ago, the last Lorde album, before the store opened, huge fan of hers, and she, I can't remember if they both came out the same day, if the physical product and the stream came out the same day, but I was so excited that I woke up at 6 a.m. and listened to the streaming version. And later that day, it must have been the same day, because I think later that day I got the vinyl copy, and my wife and I listened, and she's an incredible ear, and she's like, whoa, this is not the same record. And like we went back and then there's just, a guitar that was, very apparent in on the streaming one is like you barely hear it on the physical copy. And, part of that could be artistic choice where, to press a record, that needed to be in the queue months in advance. And it could have been a whole thing of like you can upload something, at the absolute last minute. And so it could have been a choice of like, after the fact, be like, ooh, I don't like that, and changing a mix at that point. So that's what in that case, but you will definitely hear differences sonically between vinyl and and streaming, even though, getting back to your question, the majority of things are digital these days. Yeah.
Well, let's go back to your shop. You've been on Main Street in Phoenixville since 2021. You started at 28 Main Street, but now you're at 10 Main Street. And before that, you were selling records at pop-up shops and venues. Talk to us about your journey with selling records and how you decided that 2021 of all years was the right time to open a brick and mortar place as we're all recovering from pandemic lockdowns.
Yeah, I wish it was a more skilled and financial and just a more academic reason for that specific time. But I'll tell you. So that started. I mean, again, my dad passed away in 1997. It was my task to close the stores, and that happened in '98 for multiple reasons. But after my dad passing away and closing the two stores at the time, I did forget to get to that. At one point we had 3 stores, and for most of the time we had 2. But right after that, I actually just being behind the counter of a record store is it's how I exist. And so I actually started working part-time at a Sam Goody in 1998. I worked there for a couple of years just to be in a record store. And, life moves on and, corporate jobs and do things like that just because, records were not a thing or extremely niche, like the used record store. It was kind of a thing in the late 90s into the 2000s and the high fidelity type of thing. It always been on my mind. And when I'd work at, jobs and all of a sudden music comes up and I just start talking like this, and inherently someone's like, isn't there something you can do with what you know? Like, working at a bank is not exactly what you should be doing. And I'm like, I know, I just don't know what to do. And so 7 years ago, on our honeymoon, my wife and I were talking, and just the idea of like what it would look like to have a record store came up. We're sitting on the beach in York, Maine, and just talking about what it would look like to have a record store. And fun honeymoon. Like we went back to where we were staying, and like I started sketching out like with that, with this, just visualizing this place, and got really excited. And but literally, as soon as we got home from our honeymoon, she was starting grad school, and I had the corporate job, which had the benefits. So it's like this. There's no way this can happen now. But I've always been a person that the mindset of like a dream deferred, like often doesn't happen. And if there's a possibility, how can this happen right now? And just by a couple of circumstances, I connected with a coffee house in Phoenixville, and talked to the owner about what if I just set up a table and some crates on a Saturday morning, and he was all about it. And I'm not selling my music. And I did some research and found a national distributor and got that relationship going. And the initial piece also was I was friends with a local artist that his art was specifically about music. He made coasters, art prints that he created of musicians. And so I did everything, so this pop-up was a full-on business. Had a state business license and retail, like state tax, forms and all that kind of stuff. And, tax ID, and got the name registered, had a graphic design artist, like kind of put the finishing touches on my logo. I kind of had a logo, and a friend of mine, she was like, she goes, it's better if your font can't be found somewhere, if it's an original font. So she kind of took what I had done and created a unique font for it. And, of course, the name forever changes. And, started out as a pop-up. And that was June of 2019. And that went on until March 2020, which we all know about that. And but I still, all the inventory was in our house. And over lockdown, I would post records that I had, and if people wanted them, I'd do a porch drop off locally. And then once things lifted by November 2021, maybe before then, maybe October, I'm not sure. The place I was doing the pop up, they didn't reopen, and so there was another coffee house in town, Steel City, that offered me the opportunity to continue my pop up in their space on Saturdays, and did that for another year. It was November 2020 was when we did that, and was perfectly fine with that until October of 2021, when okay, to dial back just a second, when we were to go back 7 years, but on that beach again, I had a place in mind. I literally was visualizing a certain space, just almost randomly, like, just I had a specific storefront in mind. And pretty sure it was October of 2021. And a friend of mine's like, hey, there's a storefront on Main Street that's available. I just want to let you know. I was like, okay, and walked down, and it was the exact storefront that I was picturing back in 2018. And I was like, okay, that's some kind of a sign. I don't know. And so within a month, opened the store. And most of it was, people were like, how'd you do it? And like, I already had all the paperwork stuff, the stuff that takes, in my opinion, takes time, was done. And all the other things I needed, I had people, I knew a woman that does like, window signs, things like that. A friend of mine, another woman, she does woodworking. She made my bins. A friend of mine, he made the sort of front, the current, like a wall, like we call it the wall, but like a display for like, the current releases. Everything was, and then since as far as decor, it was really easy because that artist, Brian Hearns, that I was selling his stuff, he had these huge, large pieces, and we just hung them against one of the walls. It was really easy to put together. It's weird how quickly that storefront happened. And so, yeah, that's how we went. I wish it was more of a, we had a specific timeline and looked at the, finances and accounting and everything. But no, it was simply that this storefront that I had visualized was available, and that's where we landed.
And I love that. I absolutely love that. Here it is. Let's do it. I love it. I love it. Shawn, I've been into your shop there on Main Street at 10 now, 10 these days, 10 Main Street. I've been in there a handful of times now, and it's really clear that you like jazz music. And in the interest of time, I will say, can you try to tell us what jazz means to you in maybe 3 to 5 minutes? I feel like you could spend a weekend educating us on all the wonderful things about jazz, but just kind of briefly, why does it matter so much to you? And how do you welcome those interested in learning about the genre, maybe folks who don't understand jazz the way you do?
Sure, I will be brief. What jazz means to me, culturally, it was created and perfected by Black musicians. Obviously there are plenty, countless, musicians, white and other musicians of other cultures and ethnicities that play jazz, of course. But this music started in Congo Square in New Orleans, out of the African experience in America, and for me, it is the pinnacle of Black excellence. When I think about Ellington, these pieces are unbelievable and so complex. And once you get to bebop with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and everything that came after that, it's mind blowing what these musicians created. And so, from that perspective, it's extremely important to me, and feeds my soul. But also as a music, as a sound, for me personally, it's ever. You can always listen to it. You can listen to the same piece over and over again. You're always getting something out of it. There's never a point when, there are albums of mine that are lovingly exhausting because I just listen to them over and over again. And each time it's like, I missed something. I got to hear it again. And I love that. And so that's for me. as far as educating folks and sharing that experience, one thing I found with jazz is there is a jazz for everyone, and I truly mean that. And someone might be listening, and be like, "Nope, I've heard it. I don't like it. I don't like it." There's like the soul jazz, the groove stuff that almost sounds like a song without words, just a very locked in tight groove. There's bluesy jazz. There's vocal jazz, fusion, jazz rock. There's something for everyone, and in that, if you, I have not been proven wrong yet, but if you just play it and take out all of the academia and all the gatekeepiness, or just listen to this, or just have it playing, and evidently, not evidently, without question, the listener will be like, "Wow, this is okay. This is nice," and just sharing that experience. I think that's one other thing I love about jazz. Like, it can just be, Bill Evans, the great jazz piano player. He can either be really great background music, you're having a dinner party, some wine and cheese, and having friends over, and it's playing, and it's just creating the vibe for the evening. Or you can sit and just listen and just take in everything that's happening, and that the classic first trio with Paul Modian's brushwork and Scott LaFaro and his insane bass runs, and you can take it in that way, or just have it on, and I have a family that they have two pretty hyper boys, and they bought a Bill Evans record, and it just calms their boys down like crazy. And it's like, they don't care about the legacy of Scott LaFaro, or just how Bill Evans' style changed once he passed away, and just the different bass players and drummers that they could care less. They just know that this music calms their boys down. So yeah, that could be like, he's more important than that. But also, these boys are like 10, 12 years old, listening to jazz, so it's like, it's in there. And I'm just curious to, see what these teenage and 20 something guys are going to be with, it's like, I love jazz. And I guess it's from my parents playing it when I was like 10, but yeah,
that's Nora Jones for our family. Nora Jones's CDs were just on constant loop when my little ones were younger. And I tell you what, I've never looked at her albums. I don't know any of the album names, but I can sing along with every song and play them over and over and over.
Yes.
Well, that's a whole different perspective on music enjoyment and even music utility. And I wonder, in this age of digital music and algorithms introducing listeners to new music, an in-person record store needs to be extra special to stand out. And in our trips to your shop, we feel like you absolutely have that something special. You can call it a fancy and say, je ne sais quoi, I don't know. But how do you try to sell records to your customers when they enter your store?
That's a great question. And it really does start with my brother Andre from, at my dad's store. And it sounds really pretentious, but he really did set the standard for how the store sold records and how I learned. And I hate even calling it selling. I've had customers with an armful of records, and they're like, "You're really good at selling us." And I'm like, I haven't sold. I'm just telling you how much I love something. I'm playing you something. With streaming, we can, it allows us to they're not buying the stuff sight unseen. They're listening to it, and so, I think the biggest part of answering that question is, it's not selling in the sense of, I'm trying to convince you need something that you may not need, or, I think the convincing, the sort of, that element of sales isn't there. It's more, sharing passion and sharing, just sharing. And so, the complete process of selling, to use your word, starts with just the music playing in the store. And so what I like to do is find something that isn't, I've learned at this point, and I actually learned pretty quickly when we opened the store, that it is interesting, the general person's tolerance of what's playing. And I know from me going into record stores, it was a great store in Lancaster I used to go to. Unfortunately, it closed a couple years ago. But this guy loved like metal and hardcore and stuff. And I'd go in and I'm like, oh my God, this is driving me insane. But he had a really great like dollar section. So I would just put up with it to get through and get an armful of records. And I'm like, oh my God, get me out of here. And I never wanted my store to be a whole thing of like, oh my God, like I would spend more time, but I can't handle this. And so the way I tell my employees is like, it's not really the time to play what you like. You're really playing for who's in the store or who's walking by and who could come in the store. So, in that way, like I'm looking for something kind of, with a groove, a vibe, just something to kind of like, a little head nod, a little like, ooh, this is, and at the same time, I like it to be something that people might not have heard. There's an album that came out, I think in February, new Blue Note artist. Her name's Maya Delilah. It's her first album. Hasn't toured. Most people know nothing about her. I don't even think she has a Wikipedia. But this album is solid. It's got a groove. She's a brilliant guitarist. And so, that thing goes on and like open the door and people just come in because it's like, I want more of that. And they're in there and I keep selling this record, because, but even that record aside, once they're in there, you don't have to lean into what's playing. It's like once you're kind of doing a DJ profile thing of like, okay, it's two older white guys. They're in the 70s band, reminiscing about Jethro Tull and stuff. And I'm thinking what's playing might not be what they're into. So, maybe I'll, pop on, like Japanese breakfast or something, or maybe that might be a little too pushing it too much. Maybe, Black Pumas. For those two guys, a perfect thing to transition into is Black Pumas. It's got a rock sound, it's got a little bit of soul, kind of retro thing, something these two guys might not have heard. And so I put that on. And you meet the customers where they are, and you start making that conversation. And the other piece of that is knowing music. I have a lot of teenagers that work for me, and the thing I push on them so much is you have to know this stuff.
So your emphasis on knowing the music leads really nicely into my next question, because it's really, where are you keeping abreast of music? There's not really music magazines in the way there was when we were younger, and there's, a limited selection on the radio that would play things. XPN is one, I suppose. But where are you learning about new music? How do you decide what to buy? How do you know what's hip and trending? You're talking about artists and musicians that you know of, but the wider public might not. How do you stay abreast, and how do you decide what to buy?
Gotta collect your resources. I know I'm 53. I know, I'm at the age of like, I like what I like. I'm not saying that's me, but that's the mentality of someone my age. Being stuck in the 80s, early 90s, like that can happen. But all of this is honestly on the job learning. When I first opened, and even before I opened a store, when I had a pop-up, and I was in this coffee house, and most of the young ladies at the coffee house, they were young, and they kept talking about this Mac Miller guy, and I honestly had never heard of the guy. It was 2019 or maybe 2020, and I was like, okay, whatever, and I remember talking to someone else, being like, yeah, these girls keep talking about this Mac Miller. I'm like, oh, he's a thing. You need to, I'm like, oh, really? Okay. And kind of putting aside, like, I know everything, and be like, okay, there's a lot I don't know. And just once you cut, and I had an employee that like, and even I had a customer that like, it's like, hey, can you get, and he was a hip hop guy. And I was like, sure, I'll order it for you. I remember, the order came in, and the special order was sitting on the counter, and someone else came in and was like, oh my gosh, you have that? And I was like, well, actually, do you have any more? And it's like, okay, duly noted, and you start kind of knowing who you should listen to. And some of it really is as crude as I just know people that, when they mention something, or at this point, I'll even reach out to them. It's like, hey, that one guy is like, hey, what's going on in hip hop? And he goes, oh my gosh, so-and-so. And it's like, okay, just start making that list. I had an employee that like, she was always like, about a year before Chaperone became a thing, she was like, can you get an album by someone named Chaperone? And that has always been her. And so, as non, corporate is just listening to what people that I know are into something that I would have no idea about. But at the same time, I follow record labels on social media, and like I knew about the Mind Alive thing before that album came out. I was like, and that's why I ordered. I'm like, okay, check that out even before the album came out. When Blonde Shell's first album came out, she opened for Suki Waterhouse, and XPN did a review of the show, and they were like, "Oh, the opener was really great." And whenever that pre-order popped up, I'm like, I'm going to couple, just literally. And part of my job is trying to figure out what's next, what's hip, what's a generation two generations younger than me, what they're into. It is as much a part of my job as doing the books, payroll. It's as important as that. And also, I do also subscribe to Billboard, because one thing I found really early was there are so many sources of getting music. I had two people about 2 years ago asking for a song, totally separate, but literally within a week of each other, and they had heard them from their Peloton instructor. I'm like, I can't keep up with this. And then people, Steve Lacy, was like, that was a TikTok thing. And I'm like, I can't. And, Billboard literally has a chart for TikTok or a chart for, I'm like, okay, I just need one resource for this, what are people listening to? Yeah. And so there's no specific one, but there's a lot of ways, but it is an active part of what I do.
I think so much of music you discover comes from community. And for example, I take a lot of yoga classes, and there are many yoga classes where one of the other students will raise their hand and say, "What was that song you played?" They want to know, so it's amazing where you can find new stuff. Let me ask you about your own personal taste, though. What's one band or musician you love that would surprise your acquaintances to hear?
So my wife loves this because it's the weirdest thing. I'm a 53-year-old African-American from Philly, and one of my absolute favorite bands I'm obsessed with is the group Poco. And for those who don't know, Poco is a country rock group whose first album came out in '69. And it is probably the whitest thing. But it's like and to me, that's a part of music is universal. It's not about I look like this, so I should listen to this. Poco, they're killer. And, my favorite band in the world is Buffalo Springfield. And so they came out of that. So, that's why. But I am obsessed with Poco.
Shawn, I want to jump into another one of our important questions. And when you and I and Eric were having coffee recently, it was pretty clear that a lot of people know you in your neck of the woods up there in Phoenixville. And inevitably, a lot of people. So I want to ask you what might be a difficult question for you. Tell us about a business or nonprofit in Chester County that more folks should know about it.
I would say two places in Phoenixville, and one around here, we all know of it, but maybe other folks don't, which is PACS, which is Phoenixville Area Community Services. And this is an organization that literally just feeds folks. They, you can donate food to them. I think some of the local restaurants provide, some product to them, whatever. But, you'll see a line out there. I forgot what days of the week, but, it's very simple. Let's feed our community. And the other one is Anne's Heart, which is a smaller organization, but at the same time, just providing food, clothing for folks in need. And there's one more. One of my teens that works for me, high school kid, she actually runs a nonprofit, and it's called Kit's Closet. And what Kit's Closet does is it provides clothing for young women or female presenting who don't have what they, it's all the socially need, a prom dress or just clothes for school, just so they're not being made fun of for not having the gear they should have. And it's free. And her storefront, using air quotes, it looks like, a clothing store. So they don't feel like they're going to it just creates an environment where a young lady can shop for what she needs for, homecoming, prom, something for school, or just to hang out with her friends. But there's no payment. And so those are the three I would say.
Thank you for those suggestions. They're all impactful organizations, so I appreciate you sharing their names. What about Forever Changes? Are you currently hiring?
Not right now. And, I'm always, I always want to keep a conversation open, but at this point I kind of scout out. And I say kids because, honestly, I love young folks working for me because they just have an energy, and like, I don't know, it's a great energy. And so at this point, I kind of have a queue. Like there's a young lady who had just graduated high school, and we are trying to find a way for her to work for me this summer, but her schedule is too busy. She's going away to college, but hopefully next summer. There's a really young cat. He's a 15-year-old guy. He's helping me with some inventory in the back. And just kind of like he's not ready for the front yet, but just he's literally almost doing what I was doing when I was a kid, which was just seeing titles, having to alphabetize things and just seeing these different album covers and bands, and he'll ask questions like is Jethro Tull a person or a group, and I had to explain that. He didn't know what Motown was, explain that, and like I'm totally I'm not one of these. He doesn't know what it's like. 15, in 2025. Like, why should he know what Motown is? So I've got a really cool crew now, high school kids, and I've got some in the pipeline. It's the point where this family came up from Texas, and the daughter, we just could talk like peers. I think she was maybe 15 or something. And I like sort of joked and sort of didn't because this girl's grandparents live up here, and that's why they were up visiting. I'm like, hey, if she wants to spend a summer, and her grandparents were there, like, okay, she can stay with us. And I'm like, I'm kind of being serious. If she wants to spend a summer with her grandparents and work here next summer, let's do it. So not hiring, and but yeah, if there's someone who it is such a unique person that can do this job, and so I like kind of collecting the people that that seem like they're going to be good employees.
Well, I'll be keeping an eye on your website in case you start offering opportunities for 50-year-old white guy volunteers. On a serious note, though, Shawn, community matters to you. That's come clear
Totally.
in our conversations with you. And through your record store, Forever Changes, you're doing a lot to support the community. Let's flip that around a little bit. How can the community support the work that you and your family are doing through the record store?
Great question. I think obviously the big one's to buy things. If you don't have a record player and there's nothing in my store that you can purchase, just telling folks about the store and social media. I also DJ, vinyl DJing. And so, if there's a gig out there, I'm doing something for, I forgot the organization. I'm doing something tomorrow for, I think, the Y, I think. It's a Black Music Month. It's kind of program, just doing like 3 hours of, Black music, whatever. But just, getting the word out, talking about the store. It's any way, it's the way I market myself. There's a lot of record stores around me. And the way I hope to bring people into the store is that they're going into a place to talk to and to interact with someone who knows music. I'm not going to snow you, and if you bring up a band that I don't know and be like, oh yeah, them, it's like, I'm not familiar with them, tell me more. And, and at the same time, I just a quick story about how I work is there was a young guy who came to my store, and he had an $80 Hendrix box set in his hand. And I was like, oh, you're a fan. And he goes, no, actually, this is my first Hendrix album, whatever. I'm like, okay, no, this should not be. It's great. It's the Live in Maui set, but sonically, it's not the best. It was a live recording that they had to do a lot of work to get it presentable. And I'm like, this should not be your first Hendrix album. So I directed him to Already Experienced. And, so I went from an $80 sale to a $30 sale. And, in my mindset, it's like, instead of walking and being like, cool, I sold that. And this guy may never buy another Hendrix album or another album from me. It's like, I'd rather him have a proper introduction and think, oh, that guy, wow, he directed me, in the right way, I'm going to go back. So yeah, that's how I exist. And if anyone wants to help in that cause, that'd be great.
Shawn Cephas, owner of Forever Changes Record Store. In addition to popping into your shop during business hours, where can listeners connect with you and hopefully pick up their next favorite record?
Well, we do. I am on social media for all of its faults on Instagram and Facebook. I do a lot more on Instagram, and I do have a Blue Sky. I try to keep up with that, but I don't as much, but which I need to get back on. But yeah, social media, and on social media you can find our events calendar because we book jazz shows every third Friday at the Phoenix here in Phoenixville. We have a jazz series at Soul Joel's and at Sunnybrook in Pottstown. We have a not as steady. Oh, the Soul Joel's is every first Thursday. We are skipping July because it's July 3rd. And so the August one is August 7th, I believe, and that is not to be missed. And at the Gem in Spring City, it's not as, the frequency is a little more, it's not as, solid, but we book jazz shows there. So follow the socials and follow those venues for stuff we're doing there. We do some things in store. There's a local brewery club or Brewmeister club that has an event at our store. The next one is next Thursday, the last Thursday of the month. And so, yeah, just the socials and just check the calendars and see what's going on. And yeah.
Oh, Shawn, this was an absolute treat for me, and I look forward to seeing you around the county and, of course, at Forever Changes. Thank you.
Thank you. It was a treat for me as well. Thanks, guys.
And thanks to you, our listeners, for tuning in today. We so value your time and your attention. Please know that we will keep or post all sorts of notes over on our website at startlocal.co. I'm going to try to list and link to all the artists that Shawn mentioned. So it's a musical educational journey for you today, folks. Again, everything's over on startlocal.co. We publish a new episode every fortnight, and you can catch our show wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Take a moment to subscribe to our email list to make sure that you keep up to date with all that we're doing. And of course, we welcome you to connect with us, follow us on LinkedIn and other social media. Thanks so much. Until the next time, bye for now.